Hello, my name is Ángel Rosario Rivera, and this is my PowerPoint presentation of Les Miserables. First, we're going to start with the introduction. Les Miserables was a novel that was made by famous writer at the time and still is famous, Victor Hugo. The movie is set during the during the June Rebellion, Paris, which occurred from 1815 to 1832, in which that event happened in between, but the novel narrates from that time, from those timelines. The movie basically narrates how a man who has served in prison for 19 years is trying to redeem himself from life for spending that amount of time in prison and helping others thanks to a person who basically showed him the path to become a better person. Since the novel has been read by millions and millions of people, in the 1980s it was converted into a movie, and and about 2 decades later, in 2012, it had been converted into a musical version of it. Now let's talk about the characters of Les Miserables. First, we got John Valjean, who is the main protagonist of the novel and is the person who has served 19 years and is trying to regain himself in life. Next, we got Inspector Joubert, who is the main antagonist of the movie, who was the person who who abused John Valjean during his time in prison and is trying to track down John Valjean to send him to prison again. Next, we got Fantine, who is the mother of Cosette, a young girl, and is a poor person who was forced into prostitution to make just enough money for her daughter, who, as we said, is Cosette, who is the biological daughter of Fantine, and who is a poor, a young person who during the Les Miserables novel was from a child into a teenager. Next, we got the Thénardiers, who are the caretakers and abusers of cassettes, and the father stole money from people that were dead in the grave, and almost all the family abused cassettes and stole money from Fantine that was supposed to go towards cassettes. Next, we got the Bishop Mario, who is the Bishop of Ding, and is the person that we said about earlier, the person who helped John Valjean to to show him the path of how to become a good person. And lastly, we got Marius Pontmercy, who is a second in importance person who is a lawyer and is the fiance of Cassette when she gets married with him. Now let's talk about the descriptions of each character. Don Valjean was a rich man from almost all of the novel who who for some time in the novel owned a factory that produced and made blackjack glass. And as well, thanks to his successfulness, he became the mayor of the town he moved into after being let go from prison, who was Montreal Sorman. After some events, he adopted Cosette and flee the city he was into another city. And after some more and more events, he died in his deathbed with Cosette and her fiance Maris alongside of him. Now Fantine was a poor mother who was a worker at the previous factory I mentioned about. Uh, she didn't make a lot of money, and for that she had to sell her tooth and her hair, as well as forcing herself into prostitution just to make enough money for a cassette who was born out of wedlock, meaning that when she was born, her dad ditched both of them. Inspector Javert was a police officer who basically gave his entire life to the police force, and was willing to live the rest of his life by not breaking any single law. Javert was also the person who killed Fantine for thanks to tuberculosis, or shot thanks to some things he said. Fantine, after she was heavily sick, passes away. As we said, he was the main antagonist of the novel as well as the both movies, who, after some events, killed himself by drowning after realizing that after he was trying to not make any single mistakes in his life, he realized that he made so many and he made so many errors, and he did not and he realized the world that he was living into, that he couldn't live with it anymore. Now, as we said, the young girl, Cassette, was Fantine's daughter. As we said, was born out of wedlock and adopted by Jean Valjean once he fled the city from Javert and rescued her from her caretaker's abuse. And soon she married a fiance, Maris Montmorency, when she was a teenager. And once Valjean died, she was already an adult and have a children, so a family of four or five. The Thénardiers were basically the main villains of the movie, although Javert was the main antagonist of the novel and movies. The Thénardiers were basically the main villains and the most evil persons in the whole novel. They manipulated Fantine into giving her for money. They abused Cosette heavily, and, as we said again, stole money from Fantine that was supposed to go to Cosette for their own good. Now, the Bishop Mario was basically was basically an angel for Boljan. Since he was the nicest person in the entire movie. The bishop was a very nice man, a very kind man, merciful, and has lived almost his entire life in peace thanks for him to being a bishop and being heavily into religion. Finally, the last main character was Marius, who, as we said, was a was the was Cosette's fiance, was a was a lawyer, and is the grandson of Monsieur de Normand, another rich man of the time. Now, let's talk about the internal traits and external traits of each character. Jean Valjean was, for in the internal trait, was a caring, loving, merciful, kind, honorable, and compassionate person. While the external trait was he was middle aged, rich, uh, was in prison being an ex-convict, very serious, and during his time had for to still just to live, just to be barely to be able to live alongside his family. Now, Fantine was a sweet, sentimental, devoted, naive, and innocent person who was forced into prostitution. She was heavily sick, who was born and was the mother of, as we said, Cosette. Now, Inspector Javert was during the whole movie in self-denial. He wasn't merciful. He was always alone, and he had a lot of privations. and as well as John Valjean. He was a prison guard. He was very serious. He was a monomaniacal, an inspector, and a legalist. Now, Kazan, being almost as same as her mother, was naive, daring, a good person, and innocent, who was for the whole movie or novel, a young Maris's wife during the very end was abandoned by Fantine since she couldn't have money for her and couldn't afford having her, and as I said, was the daughter of Fantine. The Thénardiers, as we said, the main villains of the movie, who were greedy, disrespectful, entitled, uncaring, evil, selfish, and basically bad people. And there were a family of brats who, not all of them were brats, but most of them were brats. Uh, and as we said, basically the main villains of both novel and movies. Second to last, the Bishop Myro, as we said before, was a kind, respectful, and basically the very opposites of the Fenadias. And for the external trait, he was an old priest, a bishop, and inspirer of John Valjean, and had a half of both movies and novel. Since, as we said, was the nicest person and the kindest person during the entire movie and novel. And finally, we got Mary's Parkmancy, who, as we said, was compassionate, confident, and intelligent at the same time. Who was a lawyer, he was young, handsome, and romantic. Now, let's talk about the rising action of the novel and the movie of Les Miserables. The rising action of the movie is that after 9 years after moving into Montreal-sur-Mer, Jean Valjean became mayor of Montreal-sur-Mer, the town we said before, incredibly rich, who owned a factory and became, after the encounter and the incident, uh, the of what happened at the bishop's home during the first part of the movie, became an honest and respectful man during that after being caught by Javert, who at the time Valjean changed his name, and Javert believed that he was another person until saving another man from him, from being falsely accused of being Jean Valjean, and Javert killing Fantine by tuberculosis slash shock, fled the city and rescued Cosette from the Thénardiers. After saving Cosette, he went into hiding into another town in which both Cosette and Valjean lived their lives in on incognito, moving from town to town, from from for not allowing Javert catching and caught up with them to again arrest both of them, since Cosette was basically in Javet's eyes a criminal. But soon Cosette fell in love with her soon-to-be fiancé, Marius. Now, the climax of Les Miserables is that after she fell in love with him, the she didn't know that Marius was, even though he was a lawyer and the grandson of Monsieur Sommer, a rich old man who and a Marcus, he was also part of the rebellion group against Paris, whose goal was to have a revolution in the capital of France. Soon after a large debate of the police and said group, they both had a firefight in which Javed finally caught up with both with John Valjean, Cosette, and Marius. And during that time, after he found out, Marius was shot by one of the policemen, in which forced Valjean to rescue the injured young man and flee to the sewers underneath the firefight to save cause Marius from dying, since he knew how much Cosette and Marius had between them. But little does both know that that they were both spotted by Javert and was making his way onto the sewers to finally and once for all arrest both of them. But that's not the case, since in the following action, after a heated argument between Jean Valjean and Javert, who was again finally told that every single mistake that he has made in his life, how he made the poor suffer, and the lies that he had been told all during all of his life. John, Javed decides that is the only reasonable thing to do, to leave both of them alone, leave the sewers, and commit suicide by jumping off a bridge into a river. Before Javed commits suicide, the firefight stops, and thanks to Cassette and a nurse at the by to save Marius, uh, let's actually both of them to get married with the permission of John Valjean, who he gladly says yes to let them both be married. Now, for the final part of the movie is the resolution, in which, after both finally being married, uh, John Valjean feels that with his presence being there, he he thought that it would hurt both Marius and Cosette's life and relationship between them. So after telling Marius all of his life, from being an ex-convict to being a mayor and a rich person in Montreal-sur-Mer, to fleeing said city and rescuing Cosette, and to the point that they were there, uh, and Marius trying to make make Jean Valjean to not leave. Sadly, Jean Valjean leaves the wedding, basically losing uh, the party they both Cosette and Marius had for the wedding. After a couple of years, then Cosette and Marius became adults with children. When they get a message from somebody that tells them basically that Jean Valjean is dying, and if they can and if they want to visit him. Once they visit him, they had a talk and some father daughter fiance time, in which Valjean peacefully passes away. Soon after, Jean Valjean is then buried on an unmarked grave to show what he has done for not only his life, on how he has been successfully redeemed, but all the good things that he has done, from rescuing Kazan to try from his attempt to saving Fantine to saving Maris, and a lot of good things that he has done. Now, the general analysis of the movie is that Jean Valjean, in short, was around 60 to 70 years old main protagonist, stepfather of Cosette, and savior of Maris, in which the main incident that happened is at the very start of the movie. Uh, he he has there was a heated argument between the bishop and the police alongside Valjean, in which the bishop uh, makes the police free Jean Valjean from being captured ever again and same and being spent the rest of his life in prison. Or as we see the incident here, he escaped the town that he was at, but for almost a decade since Javert found out who he was after years of his identity not being blown. Javert is a middle-aged man who's 50 to 60 years old, inspector of the police, and imprisoner of Jean Valjean, in which the main incident that happened of Javert is that he at the argument that he had between Jean Valjean and himself, he committed suicide by jumping off the train since he couldn't bear the reality of the world he hadn't seen in his entire life. Fantine, who was 20 to 30 years old before dying, was the mother of Cosette, Paul, and an innocent soul who her main event was that her that her that she died by tuberculosis last shock thanks to Javert after screaming both at Jean Valjean and Fantine what would happen to both of them and what would happen to Cosette. And she couldn't bear it, so she sadly passed away. Now, Cosette was 10 to 20 years old during in Les Miserables, and who was daring and kind, and her main reason being that Cosette, finally, after years and years of abuse, flee her caretaker's home alongside Valjean, who rescues her. The Thénardiers were a family who were a family that in all of the family, they were around 7 to 50 years old. Who most of them, mainly the parents, were cruel, thieves, and honestly evil people. Who the main incident was that, or main event was that after that John Paul John finally figured out that said that the Thénardiers were stealing money from Fantine by by Fantine giving money towards them, but not towards the Thénardiers directly. It was for Cosette to help her live and have a nice life, but little does she be know, the money was being stolen from her and was being kept to themselves. Maris was around 20 to 30 years old as well, and he was an innocent, handsome, and a kind fella who, as we talked before, his main incident was he got shot by a policeman during a firefight between two groups, the rebellion group and the police force. And finally, the Bishop Myro, who was the Bishop Thing, was around 70 to 80 years old, who was officially one of the oldest characters of Les Miserables, who was old, kind, the Bishop Thing, and good soul, whose his main isn't as we talked in the first part of the general analysis of the characters and incidents was that John Valjean stole from the bishop, fled his home, was caught by the police, taken to the bishop's house. After after some argument, the the bishop's the bishop forced the police to leave him, saying that John Valjean was was someone that he knew for a long time and that he didn't stole the thing he stole, but actually that the bishop gave it to them. So the policeman, let go from John Valjean, and and after some talk between the two of them, that's how John Valjean became an honest and respectful man. Now, the general analysis of the writer and director's way of presentation is that first, Victor Hugo, as we talked in at the first of the video, was the writer of Les Miserables, and as we talked before, he made the novel just to show how life was during in France during the 19th century, as well how to show how wealth and distribution, industrialism, and the justice system uh, were during that time. Uh, in in the 1982 film of the movie, it was made by Robert Hoysen, who created to highlight the novel for the first time on movies since it was made into movie. And after that, many short films, or should I say, stories of Les Miserables were told just to make the audience understand better until 2012, the movie was converted into a musical. And the overall analysis of the movie is that, in short, John Valjean gets out of prison for after 19 years, becomes rich, flees the city to rescue someone, goes MIA with Cassette, the person he rescued from. Uh, Cassette falls in love with Marius. Marius gets shot. John Valjean saves him, letting them to be married. But before that, Java kills himself. And then they get married, and John Valjean leaves the couple for fear of ruining their relationship. Both Cassette and Marius have children, and John Valjean passes away. Overall analysis of the movie. Now, my personal analysis was that for the very start was that for the for the actions and incidents that happened at the very start of the movie during from John Valjean escape, finally being let go from prison, and the incident at the bishop's home, it starts off really strong to for you to see John Valjean's background of how in that 1982 film he was being treated in his prison, and in the 2012 version, one of his fine on he showed how one of his final moments of him being there in prison, and it's also really strong. The Les Miserables just really strong. Now the rise in action it was fascinating to see to someone who was an ex-convict just to see to help him to help his dying family who was ba- who was first imprisoned by stealing a loaf of bread, and then after many attempts of escaping was his his jail sentence was drawn and more and more and more and more and more longer until it reached almost 2 decades, in which Napoleon finally stopped after all, and the abuse of him didn't stop there, and he realized uh, that if he would get out, he would that if if he didn't behave, he will be spending another 5 decades. Yeah, sorry for that. Uh, and the rest in action, as we said, for me, it's fascinating to see how a man who stole from survival and became mayor of a town and became very rich, fled the city in fear of getting caught again by the same person who beaten him during his time in prison, and how he rescued someone else just to save that person from being abused as well. Now, the climax throughout the novel, I was waiting for the fight or some mega event to break it down, and in which the climax uh, gave us that firefight and between the firefight between the rebellious group and and the police force. In which when I saw the rebellious group, I was like, Oh my god, it's gonna happen. The part that I've been waiting for the entire movie is gonna finally happen. Now, the following action is when the fight ends. Marius is able to live thanks to John Valjean, and Javed kills himself. In which, in my opinion, Javed didn't have to commit suicide, but instead he could have searched for help or have followed through for John Valjean to help him uh understand everything bad he has done and how he could fix it. But alas, he decided to commit suicide. And the resolution is always, in most movies, the sad part because it shows the end uh, of life, the passing away of John Valjean, the main protagonist, as we said, and show and after being shown from all of the bad things he had done, being redeemed by doing more good things, saving multiple people from abuse and from being killed, as well as killing a bad person who thought he was doing something good, that he was wrong, that everything he was doing was just mm-mm. Now, my personal experience was that the movie was very good, and after finally seeing the novel, no, the movies, I was finally able to understand how such novel was able to be such fantastic and overall good experience in reading. And this novel should appear and being spread out to multiple schools that don't have or that don't have the ability to read the novel, just so they can show and learn on how, if you were a bad person, it shows you how you were such a bad person and how you can redeem yourself. Now, really quick, my personal opinions of each character is that John Valjean, amazing character. The Victor Hugo did him really good, and he fantastically showed how a man can redeem himself during a sad time during the 19th century. Uh, Fantine, I would say that Fantine didn't have a good start in life, and as well as we learned from this video, as well didn't have an amazing end. In fact, she didn't have a good life. She never had any good moments in his life. She may have a good life from after Cosette was born, but it was quickly thrown away since after her father was, left both of daughter and wife, and her passing away with an illness is just absolutely just it was just horrible to see. Now, for the continuation of the opinions of each character, for Javert, uh, I'm kind of in the middle of this character since he may did not have a good start in good life, and was being told many and many and many lies through his whole life, in which one of his life basically threw him into doing many wrong things. This movie actually shows, or the novel shows how Victor Hugo could do with characters, since it also shows how somebody who could be a bad person during that time could have redeemed themselves, or being finally told the wrong thing they have done, and whichever they did, he did an excellent job with that. Now, Cassette, was basically, as I see through it, how youth was during the 19th century in France. Since in one so during one scene or multiple scenes of the movie or the Miserables, she was a child, and during the rest of the movie or Les Miserables, she became a teenager, in which at the end she became an adult with children and fiance. And as I said again, an excellent job with showing how youth could have been for most children in France during that time. The Fenatiers are basically the 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 worst kind of people during that time, because in my eyes the Thénardiers are basically the corrupt governments that were established during the 19th century, and it shows how greedy and evil some people can get during over time, for if they didn't have a good parenting or her childhoods were just horrible, and it leads them to basically bad ways, and leads to their lives. Marius was, again with the word, kind of mixed, because something inside me tells me he although he's just a little bit bad, if overall another amazing character, because it actually shows just a normal person who was medium poor but not that rich, could have lived life and have some of their actions could affect the life forever. And the Bishop Marrow, again, in my opinion, one of the best characters in the entirety of Les Miserables. And even though he was just present in the very start, you could have seen how a bishop during that time, or let's just say the pope or the popes during that time, uh, could have act and all the good things and characters changes for multiple people. It was just the characters just mwah. In conclusion of my video, uh, and of the of Les Miserables, I think that it is a really interesting and an excellent story for the world. It talks about life, how life was in the 19th century, how life can be for others in the future, for rich, for the poor, and the medium class, and how Victor Hugo can be just an excellent writer and an amazing person in narrating in narrating stories. Since this movie, as I did not mention it, was following how Victor Hugo life was in the 19th century, although it's not exactly how his life was. It's it's he made a story on his experiences that he had in his life. He maybe had escaped into a town. He maybe had to save somebody else, but he did add multiple things into the story, which just made the story even more better. And as I said before, this story is just excellent for other people to see, for schools to teach their students, and for colleges to college students, for them to make an excellent resume of Les Miserables. It's just the novel, although for those who weren't interested, may seem very boring. If you look at if you pay really close attention, it would be one of the best novels that you may have read in the entirety of your life. In short, the movie as well, it's just excellent. Now we have come into an end for our video, and I hope And thank you for watching my video. I hope you have a nice day, a great day, night, and week. Hope you have a good